Good evening, devil hunters. It's getting dark outside. I hope you've made it inside by now. Something new is in the air. Something strange. Something so extraordinary and so far beyond this very earth. And it has come to my attention that you, who probably takes a great liking towards Resident Evil, might find a special interest in such a strange thing as this. And so I welcome you to perhaps one of the greatest pieces of literary analysis that I have ever had the pleasure of partaking in. Allow me to share with you the wonderful written works of William Blake and their crucial ties to the very essence of Devil May Cry 5. These works highlight a vast array of human emotions, including anger, hatred, joy, solitude, and sorrow. The sheer wealth of parallels between Blake's visions and our beloved Devil May Cry universe is fascinating. I have invested many, many hours into deriving these connections, and my oh my, I cannot wait to share with you just how complex these tales truly are. Blake was one of the greatest, yet one of the most underappreciated visionaries of the Romantic Age. This time around, we will dive into his book of prose, Songs of Experience, and analyze its references and parallels to Devil May Cry 5. All of the answers lie in he who was guided by this very knowledge. So let us focus on him. Now, brace yourself, as this one's going to get violent. A newborn infant is without a real voice. In fact, the Latin word infans literally means unable to speak. A newborn is also without a name, and so, in our first two poems, William Blake would grant a voice and a name to infants, giving a voice to the voiceless and offering a name to the nameless. Each infant requires comfort, protection, and a mother to love it dearly. However, not all infants are so fortunate. Sometimes they are not so nurtured, and it is with this particular premise that it all began. After all, two infants are the crux of our analysis, Vergil and V. In Blake's poem, Infant Sorrow, he describes something so vile and so destructive, something so incorrigibly damaging to this hypothetical infant. Perhaps the world this baby was brought into was devoid of nurture and full of torment. Blake writes, "My mother groaned, my father wept. Into the dangerous world I leapt. Helpless, naked, piping loud, like a fiend hid in a cloud. A naked, helpless child, caught in the drear of an oh-so-sinister world. His mother's blood spattered, and her existence shattered before his very eyes, leaving him with no one, nowhere to run, and a never-ending onslaught of demons sauntered after him, cackling, a matter of life and death, with no choice but to fight." This child was none other than Vergil. The Devil May Cry 3 manga depicts this very scenario described by Blake's poem. How could he let his mother be murdered? How was he so helpless to defend her? Blake's next stanza spelled out his fate. It reads, "Struggling in my father's hands, striving against my swaddling bands, bound and weary, I thought best to sulk upon my mother's breast." This illustrates so solemnly how Vergil was forced down his own path through blood and grief. His very situation was a product of the clashing human and demon worlds with a human mother and a demon father. His father's demonic heritage commanded him to slaughter any and all resistance, even as a mere child. The swaddling bands refer to the limitations on a child's movement. These are symbolic of Vergil's restricted strength and abilities as a helpless child in the very moment of his mother's demise. Beyond this, his true potential was forever obstructed by his tunneled vision, never being able to see past his insufficiency at this tender young age. To sulk upon my mother's breast signals a rather infantile attachment in Vergil to his mother. Ava died many years back, yet Vergil still chased after what could have fixed those crippling memories. This juvenile obsession is indeed much like an infant sulking upon the breast of its mother. In the corresponding poem, Infant Joy, Blake describes the story of our infant, V. He describes a child just 2 days out of the womb and its mother. The mother asks, "What shall I call thee?" The infant claims, "Joy is my name," and the mother then binds the name Joy to her beloved child, effectively prescribing the infant a life of happiness, blessings, and joy ahead. V wants much of the same and is merely 2 days old as well. On May 1st, V was born from a damaged entity with both human and demon blood flowing in his veins. Just 2 days later, on May 3rd, V approaches the only being on the planet who could dream of defeating his demon half, Dante. On May 1st, V was birthed, and on May 3rd, he visited Dante to recite this very poem, saying, "I have no name, I am but 2 days old." This infant is in fact 2 days old, and he does name himself, choosing a short name, almost reminiscent of how many birth names are childlike abbreviations of their full versions. That damaged entity he spawned from was Vergil, of course. Still possessed by that infantile attachment to his mother's memory, he had damaged his body over the course of many battles for power. He impaled himself with his own blade and produced 2 beings from one. V emerged, a naked human newborn with a brand new set of eyes to witness all the things he had grown so blind to. He could see beyond that awful, insatiable lust for godhood that had consumed the very reason behind Vergil's existence. He could witness all that Vergil lost sight of in his search for omnipotence. V is reminded of his crippling memories in the beginning of the animated series, Visions of V, when he is left naked and helpless in front of his morphing, nightmarish demon half that has lost him. For the first time in years, he feels powerless and weak. This is almost reminiscent, again, of infant sorrow, but he is saved this time by Griffin carrying him to safety. His sweet infant joy, then, was his freedom from those swaddling bands, his father's hands, and his spiritual confinement to his mother's breast. His infant joy was a liberation from Vergil's infant sorrow, a spiritual enrichment that taught him how corrupt his past self was. It was a breaking of chains, a severing of restrictive bands that had enslaved his psyche, possessing the very motive of his existence. In fact, as he thrust his own blade into his chest, Vergil uttered the words, "Heavy chain that does freeze my bones around." This line is also from Blake's Songs of Experience. Just like infant joy and infant sorrow, this poem is called Earth's Answer. It is actually part of a corresponding poem at the beginning of Songs of Experience called Introduction. These 2 poems depict a dialogue between a male bard who symbolizes a prophet that recites divine messages, and the earth, who is personified as a woman, perhaps as Mother Earth. This is an extremely dense, multifaceted pair of poems involving the emotional impoverishment of Mother Earth by this religious figure or bard character. This, as well as several other poems in the Songs of Experience, were heavily influenced by Blake's growing critique for the established church or institutionalized religion. But an organized church, really, is just a school of thought, a collection of ideas to govern the thoughts of the people. In this case, it is a discipline that Blake sought to attack with his prose. Many of his works condemned the church's teachings of suppressing people's raw feelings, such as joy, delight, and sexual desire, being imprisoned in Earth's Answer. In this poem, Earth's replies to the bard are very dark and dreary, suggesting that she has been stripped of her livelihood. This can be interpreted as the emotional and sexual restrictions that male figureheads set on women. Mother Earth cries for the chains set by the male religious bard to be broken, to remove the shackles and restraints on her feelings of joy, delight, and sexual liberation. Similarly, Vergil seems to be breaking free of the restrictions on his own inner feelings of anger, wrath, and fury, which are further delineated in the Poison Tree. Vergil's cry is almost a reimagined Earth's Answer, in which the restraint is on Vergil himself, a traumatized, obsessive being who could not fully access the peaks of his wrath and his anger. Vergil's church, then, was his very humanity, his own collection of feelings and ideas that restricted him. His love and his compassion, no matter how minimal they may have been, still resided in him, so long as he retained his human half Perhaps Dante, then, was that religious authority, the bard who set restrictions on Vergil's inner urges and expression of those urges. Dante would always be there to contain Vergil's ravenous lust for strength, for when Vergil clashed with the one being capable of stopping him, he felt those chains again. In fact, their banter almost always loosely mimics these two poems, in that Vergil is desperately tending to his unresolved urges, and Dante is there for the sole purpose of restricting access to that from Vergil. Dante establishes order and limits on something that he truly believes should be limited and controlled, just as the established church placed limits on people's feelings and their freedom of expressing them in Blake's time. Through grief and loss, Nero becomes a religious bard himself, putting a halt to anything that would mean danger for Vergil or Dante and hindering Vergil's urges once again. And so, Vergil sought to gouge that human half and all of its influences directly out of him, and fully embrace what he felt he was so long restricted from, his fully demonic self. He would then, as he always does, seek more through the consumption of the Qliphoth's fruit. So, what exactly does a case of infant sorrow do to an infant over the years? Why has this urged Vergil to chase after the Qliphoth's fruit? Let us take a dive into traditional Kabbalah faith, which in some contexts translates to mysticism or occult knowledge. This portion of Jewish tradition deals with the spiritual process of ascent for humans in their pursuit of intimate connection with God. The Tree of Life is a diagram consisting of 10 attributes, or nodes, that represent aspects of spiritual prowess in a human, such as the human psyche, God, and existence itself. One could take 22 different paths on their journey to holy enlightenment. These nodes are known as Sephiroth, which are associated with types of values, principles, deities, angels, and celestial bodies that would guide humans to spiritual enrichment. On the flip side of the same coin lies the Qliphoth, a tree that symbolizes darkness and corrupt forces in Jewish mysticism. This impure tree exists on the opposite side of the Tree of Life, and in Devil May Cry 5, it is illustrated as an inverse of the trees on Earth, its branches deep underground and its roots actually growing up to the Earth's surface and into the sky. The Sephiroth, or attributes, of this tree represent 10 different nodes in opposition to the 10 that lie on the Tree of Life. These are sometimes interpreted to have merged with ideas from demonology. In fact, the Qliphoth is sometimes called the Tree of Death, or the Realm of Shadows. This tree encompasses many dark concepts, including death and suffering, but still serves as a roadmap of experiential learning in regards to the human condition. The Qliphoth that Vergil seeks to climb is rightfully a demonic adaptation of this tree, and is capable of fusing the demon world and the human world together when fully nourished by human blood. The fruit it bears grants divine power to the demon who dares to consume it. This also holds a strong parallel to Jewish Kabbalah faith, considering how its Qliphoth fruit has peels to protect the divine flow from dissolving, much like the many layers of the tree and the fruit that Vergil seeks. Qliphoth literally means peels or shells, and how appropriate considering this demon tree is very layered like an onion, with blood clots and human blood fueling its roots. When Urizen consumed it, his own peels of dead skin fell off, exposing the divine yet demonic core that lay underneath. This fruit is also, in a sense, reminiscent of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which Adam and Eve consume as the original sin, but in this case, Vergil was immorally gaining power, rather than the godlike realizations of good and evil. This term, Qliphoth, in all cases, describes the outer shell of something deceased and protecting the essence of its divine core. When the tree's tendrils sucked the blood of humans, the victims were left lifeless husks, or peels of something that once lived, which again is much like the tree taking their essence and their blood, but leaving their shells to fall and rot. This fruit was hinted at in the very beginning of our tale, and it grew both day and night, till it bore an apple bright. But what exactly was growing? These two lines were taken from Blake's A Poison Tree, which eerily ties back to Vergil's inevitable descent following his infant sorrow. A tragic incident resulting in severe damage to the child's mind. Something stirred so violently within him, and with no one to share in his sorrows, he would feed that awful thing. That awful thing demanded blood, and so blood he would spill. That thing was Vergil's fury, his anger, his wrath. Here is a poison tree. I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath did end. I was angry with my foe. I told it not, my wrath did grow. And I watered it in fears, night and morning with my tears, and I sunned it with smiles, and with soft deceitful wiles, and it grew both day and night, till it bore an apple bright, and my foe beheld it shine, and he knew that it was mine, and into my garden stole, when the night had veiled the pole. In the morning glad I see my foe outstretched beneath the tree. This is an instance of what anger can do to a person when it is sealed within them. Blake conveys to us the two approaches to anger. One can openly embrace it and share that inner rage with others, allowing himself a channel to allow this anger to simmer down. Or he can bottle it within himself, allowing it to morph into something far more sinister. That anger would become wrath. And this fate is precisely what befell Vergil after the events of his own infant sorrow. Vergil did in fact feed his wrath with his fears of feeling powerless and his trail of tears following his mother's death, and that wrath did grow both day and night, bearing an apple bright, an apple of blood-soaked urges that needed to be quenched. The foe that is described actually represents Vergil's other self in this case. He who devours the poison fruit and lay lifeless beneath the tree is actually Urizen on his quest for godhood. The reader's point of view, then, seems to be Vergil's human side quarreling with his demon side. From V's perspective, he grew hateful of his obsessive lust for power and godhood, realizing all he has grown blind to because of it. But from Urizen's perspective, he holds malice for his human side and is glad to have separated from it. They are essentially foes of each other, but the story is told from V's eyes. His foe is his possessive lust for strength, following that infantile obsession his early years had carved for him, materialized by Urizen. The line, "and he knew that it was mine," signifies that the poison fruit is a result of V's past motives as Vergil, spilling blood for the Qliphoth to feed on. Urizen consumes the fruit, which may just be the physical manifestation of all the blood spilled by Vergil and the anguish that plagued his psyche. And that poisonous fruit did in fact kill Urizen, the foe. That fruit stripped away the last shred of humanity he held, and he was slain by Dante, just as Blake had written. And this is once again another allusion to the bard restricting the raw inner cravings of the earth, as Dante constrained Vergil's desires once again. The danger that lies in bottling up emotions is so wonderfully illustrated in these two halves of Vergil. These incredible 4 stanzas of A Poison Tree explore V's inner struggle with the fury raging within his other half, and his glee upon discovering Urizen's defeat, until he would merge with him once again. Perhaps we can explore that deeper. This time around, we examined Blake's Songs of Experience. Another time around, we can venture beyond that, perhaps to the Book of Urizen, or the Marriage of Heaven and Hell. So it seems. We've dug pretty deep, but maybe we've only scratched the surface. Perhaps another time, we can explore beyond the Songs of Experience and analyze other books by William Blake that hold special meanings for this game. This is my first time tackling lore from the Devil May Cry series into a focused piece of content. My editor and I worked countless hours, day and night, to produce this. Huge thanks to the phenomenal work he's done here. I hope you enjoyed what we were able to offer. This was made just for you. Please feel free to give your own thoughts on my interpretations in the comments below, and show this to anyone who shares the love of Devil May Cry lore and William Blake prose. Special thanks to my supporters on Patreon: Michael Saxon, Mark 5, Andre Novoa, Bedrosi, Overseer Fear, Wyatt Chartrand, and Tina. This means so much to me that anyone is willing to put forth money to support my content, and I cannot express to you how happy that makes me. I will be putting the names of my Patreon supporters into my videos as a shout out. So if you enjoy my content, consider supporting me at the Patreon link in the description. You can find all video, image, and music credits in the description as well. These comprehensive video analyses definitely take the full extent of my brain power each week. Here is the script, which can also be found in the description. Every single release feels more than worth it because of you. You who are watching, and especially you who support me on Patreon, are responsible for the immense successes I've experienced lately. I've received an overwhelming amount of support from you on Twitter, especially from the ROE team. And so, if you'd like to stay up to date on my latest projects, be sure to follow me at twitter.com/beggybegbeg. I'm so happy to be making exclusive content, alternating here and with Residents of Evil. Next time on Residents of Evil, you can expect a deep dive on this old woman we see here, as she holds a special place in Slavic folklore. We'll also look deeper into the fetus sigil from the trailer. You can expect this on the Residents of Evil channel sometime 8 to 9 days from now. I'll see you soon, I'm sure. Hold on to that until then.